There are shipwrecks scattered across every ocean on Earth, but few tell a story as haunting as the MS World Discoverer. Right now, in the remote waters of Roderick Bay in the Solomon Islands, the rusted hull of what was once a luxury Antarctic cruise ship sits half-submerged, slowly being reclaimed by the sea. This isn't some ancient vessel lost to history. This ship was carrying passengers when disaster struck, and what happened next defies everything you'd expect from a modern maritime emergency. The MS World Discoverer didn't sink in a violent storm or collide with an iceberg like the Titanic. Instead, this state-of-the-art cruise ship met its end in one of the most ironic ways possible, by running straight into something that shouldn't have been there. But the real story isn't just about how she sank. It's about what happened in the critical hours that followed, and why this magnificent vessel still sits exactly where her captain left her more than 2 decades ago. In December 1973, shipbuilders in Bremerhaven, Germany were putting the finishing touches on what would become one of the most capable expedition cruise ships ever built. The MS World Discoverer wasn't designed to ferry tourists between tropical islands or host Vegas-style entertainment. This vessel had a very specific mission: to take passengers to the most remote and dangerous waters on the planet. The ship's construction reflected her ambitious purpose. 7 decks housed everything needed for extended voyages into uncharted territory. There was a medical center staffed with a physician, because when you're weeks away from the nearest hospital, having medical expertise on board isn't a luxury, it's a matter of survival. The observation lounge featured panoramic windows designed to give passengers unobstructed views of landscapes few humans would ever see. A lecture hall allowed naturalists and expedition leaders to educate guests about the wildlife and geography they'd encounter. But the most crucial feature was invisible to passengers. The MS World Discoverer featured double hull construction, creating an extra layer of protection against the ice flows and underwater obstacles that could spell doom for conventional ships. This wasn't just smart engineering, it was the difference between life and death in the world's most treacherous waters. At 251 feet long with a top speed of 16.5 knots, the World Discoverer could travel 13,000 kilometers without refueling. More importantly, she was small enough to navigate narrow passages in shallow waters that larger cruise ships couldn't access. This combination of durability, range, and maneuverability made her the perfect vessel for expedition cruising. When construction finished in 1974, the ship could accommodate 137 passengers in comfortable cabins, each with their own porthole views of whatever remote corner of the world they happened to be exploring. There was even a swimming pool and sun deck, because luxury didn't have to be sacrificed for adventure. But passengers weren't booking cabins for the amenities, they were paying for access to places that appeared on very few maps.
The early years of the World Discoverer's life read like a corporate shuffle. She was initially sold to Denmark's Biwa Cruises as the Diwa Discoverer, then sold again 2 years later to Adventure Cruises, Inc., who gave her the name that would make her famous. By the late 1970s, she was registered in Singapore and began operating as a long-term charter ship for Society Expeditions, the company that would define her legacy. Society Expeditions specialized in taking wealthy adventurers to places most people only see in nature documentaries. The World Discoverer became their flagship, and her annual schedule read like a geography textbook come to life. From November to February, she'd head south to the Antarctic Peninsula, navigating through ice fields that could crush conventional ships like tin cans. Passengers would bundle up in expedition-grade parkas and board inflatable Zodiac boats to land on shores where penguins outnumbered humans by millions to 1. The Antarctic voyages were the ship's signature trips, but they were just one part of an extraordinary annual journey. From March to May, and again from August to October, the World Discoverer would island hop across the South Pacific, visiting remote atolls and volcanic islands where traditional cultures still flourished away from modern civilization. Then, during the northern summer months from June to August, she'd make her way to Alaska and the Russian border, cruising the Bering Sea, where passengers could spot whales, seals, and some of the most dramatic coastal scenery on Earth. This wasn't mass-market cruising. The World Discoverer's passengers were typically well-educated, well-traveled individuals who'd already seen the standard tourist destinations. They were paying premium prices for authentic expedition experiences, and the ship delivered year after year. Naturalists and expedition guides would lead shore excursions using the ship's fleet of inflatable boats, allowing small groups to explore beaches and wildlife colonies that larger vessels couldn't access. In 1990, the ship's registration was transferred to Liberia, a common practice for commercial vessels. 6 years later, she underwent a complete refurbishment that updated her systems and refreshed her interiors. By 2000, the MS World Discoverer had been operating successfully for over a quarter century, building a reputation as one of the most reliable and capable expedition ships in the world. But the ocean has a way of humbling even the most experienced vessels, and the World Discoverer's perfect safety record was about to come to a devastating end. The Solomon Islands occupy a remote corner of the South Pacific, scattered across nearly 1,000 miles of ocean between Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu. These islands are known for their pristine coral reefs, dense tropical forests, and some of the most challenging navigation in the Pacific. Local waters are filled with unmarked coral formations, shifting sandbars, and underwater obstacles that don't appear on most maritime charts. On April 30, 2000, the MS World Discoverer was making her way through the Sandfly Passage, a narrow waterway between the Solomon Islands. This was exactly the type of remote, challenging route that made the ship famous among expedition cruise passengers. The crew had navigated similar passages hundreds of times before, using their experience and the ship's specialized equipment to safely transit waters that would be impossible for larger vessels. At approximately 4 p.m. local time, everything went wrong in an instant. The ship struck an uncharted coral reef with tremendous force. This wasn't a gentle scraping or minor collision. The impact was violent enough to breach the World Discoverer's hull and send water flooding into her lower compartments. The double hull construction that had protected her through decades of Antarctic ice and Pacific storms couldn't save her from this hidden underwater obstacle. Captain Oliver Cruse immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Water was entering the ship faster than the pumps could remove it, and they were still hours away from the nearest port. He radioed a distress signal to Honiara, the capital of the Solomon Islands, requesting immediate assistance for 137 passengers and crew members whose lives now hung in the balance. The response was swift but complicated. A passenger ferry was dispatched from Honiara, but reaching the World Discoverer's location would take precious time. Meanwhile, the ship was settling deeper into the water with each passing minute. Captain Cruse had to make a decision that would determine whether his passengers lived or died. Instead of attempting to reach port with a sinking ship, he made the choice that would ultimately save everyone on board and doom his vessel forever.
Captain Cruse faced the kind of split-second decision that defines maritime careers. He could attempt to reach Honiara with a rapidly sinking ship, risking the lives of everyone on board if she went down in deep water. Or he could find the nearest shallow water and deliberately ground his vessel, sacrificing the ship to save the people. The nearest safe anchorage was Roderick Bay, a protected inlet surrounded by the lush tropical forests of Ngela Sule Island. The bay offered shallow water and protection from the open ocean, exactly what Cruse needed to prevent his ship from sinking completely. But getting there meant accepting that the MS World Discoverer would never sail again. The captain ordered full speed toward Roderick Bay as water continued flooding the lower decks. Passengers and crew worked together to secure loose items and prepare for what could be a very rough grounding. This wasn't the controlled beaching of a military landing craft. This was an emergency maneuver with a 137-passenger cruise ship that was already taking on water. When the World Discoverer entered Roderick Bay, Captain Cruz ran her aground in the shallows with enough force to ensure she wouldn't slip back into deeper water. The impact sent shock waves through the ship, but it achieved exactly what he intended. The vessel settled into the sandy bottom with her upper decks still above water. The passenger ferry arrived several hours later to find a surreal scene. The MS World Discoverer sat upright in the shallow water of Roderick Bay, her superstructure intact, but her lower hull completely flooded. All 137 passengers and crew members were successfully evacuated without a single casualty. Captain Cruz had made the ultimate sacrifice, his ship for his people. But the story was far from over. What happened next would determine whether the World Discoverer could be saved or would become a permanent fixture in this remote Solomon Islands bay. In the immediate aftermath of the grounding, there was still hope that the MS World Discoverer could be refloated and repaired. The ship's owners contacted marine salvage specialists to assess the feasibility of a rescue operation. On paper, it seemed possible. The vessel was structurally intact, sitting upright in shallow water. Salvage teams had successfully refloated ships in similar conditions before. But the Solomon Islands in 2000 presented challenges that had nothing to do with maritime engineering. The country was in the midst of a civil war known as the Tensions, a conflict between different ethnic groups that had paralyzed the government and made large-scale operations nearly impossible. Armed militias controlled different parts of the islands, and the security situation changed almost daily. Any salvage operation would require heavy equipment, specialized vessels, and teams of international experts working for weeks or months in an active conflict zone. The logistics alone would be staggering. Everything from floating cranes to underwater welding equipment would need to be transported to one of the most remote and unstable places on Earth. The ship's insurers conducted their own assessment and reached a conclusion that sealed the World Discoverer's fate. Given the political instability, the remote location, and the extensive damage to the lower hull, they declared the vessel a constructive total loss. This maritime insurance term essentially means the cost of salvage and repair would exceed the vessel's value, making her economically worthless despite being physically recoverable. So, the MS World Discoverer was abandoned in Roderick Bay, left to whatever fate the Solomon Islands and the South Pacific Ocean had in store for her.
What happened to the World Discoverer over the following decades reveals the complex relationship between human ambition and natural reclamation. The ship didn't simply rust away in dignified solitude. She became part of the local economy and culture in ways no one could have predicted. Local residents began stripping anything of value from the vessel almost immediately. Copper wiring, brass fittings, furniture, electronics, anything that could be sold or repurposed found its way off the ship and into the Solomon Islands' informal economy. This wasn't simple looting. For many locals, the World Discoverer represented a windfall of materials and equipment that would otherwise be impossible to obtain in such a remote location. The tropical climate accelerated the ship's deterioration in ways that wouldn't occur in colder waters. High humidity, salt spray, and temperature fluctuations caused rapid corrosion of steel surfaces. The constant cycle of tides meant that different parts of the ship were alternately submerged and exposed, creating ideal conditions for rust and structural degradation. Windows began failing as their seals deteriorated, allowing water to flood interior spaces that had remained dry since the grounding. Tropical vegetation started growing on the ship's upper decks, with seeds carried by birds and wind taking root in accumulated debris. The World Discoverer was slowly being transformed from a human artifact into something that belonged more to nature than to maritime history. But perhaps the most unexpected development was the ship's emergence as a tourist attraction. Word spread through the small but growing adventure travel community about the cruise ship wreck in the Solomon Islands. Other expedition vessels began including the World Discoverer in their itineraries, allowing passengers to see what happens when human ambition meets natural forces. Some visitors were content to observe the wreck from a distance, taking photographs and listening to guides explain the ship's history, but others wanted a more intimate experience with this maritime ghost. Local entrepreneurs began offering unauthorized tours of the vessel's interior, allowing adventurous tourists to walk through the same corridors and cabins that once housed Antarctic expedition passengers. Today, boarding the MS World Discoverer is like stepping into a time capsule that's been partially destroyed by nature and human scavengers. The ship sits at a permanent angle, her port side lower in the water than her starboard, creating a disorienting funhouse effect throughout the interior. Walking through the corridors requires careful attention to footing, as the floors slope at odd angles and debris from decades of deterioration creates obstacles at every turn. The observation lounge that once offered panoramic views of Antarctic icebergs now frames views of tropical forest and crystal-clear Pacific water. The panoramic windows are mostly gone, their frames empty rectangles that allow birds and insects free access to the interior. What furniture remains is covered in rust stains and tropical mold, creating abstract patterns that speak to the power of time and climate. The passenger cabins tell individual stories of abandonment and decay. Some still contain remnants of their original fixtures, built-in wardrobes with doors hanging at odd angles, bathroom mirrors cracked but still reflecting distorted images of visitors. Others have been completely stripped, leaving only the basic steel framework and evidence of where beds, desks, and private facilities once stood. The ship's engine room, partially flooded since the day she grounded, has become an underwater cave system accessible only to the most adventurous explorers. Marine life has moved into spaces once occupied by diesel engines and electrical systems, creating an artificial reef within the wreck itself. Small fish dart between rusted machinery, while crabs scuttle across surfaces that once vibrated with the power needed to push the ship through Antarctic waters. Perhaps most haunting is the lecture hall, where naturalists once educated passengers about the wildlife they'd encounter during shore excursions. The room's slanted floor is now covered with debris and bird droppings, while tropical plants grow through gaps in the hull. It's a powerful reminder that nature always wins in the end. The same forces the World Discoverer was built to help humans observe have now claimed the ship itself.
One of the most remarkable aspects of the World Discoverer's current existence is her transformation into an artificial reef system. The ship's steel hull has become a substrate for coral growth, attracting marine life that has created a completely new ecosystem in Roderick Bay. This wasn't planned or managed. It's simply what happens when human-made structures are left in tropical waters long enough. Fish species that typically inhabit natural coral reefs have colonized different parts of the wreck, creating distinct microhabitats throughout the ship. The engine room's flooded compartments host different species than the shallow areas near the upper decks. Small reef sharks patrol the deeper sections, while colorful tropical fish dart in and out of the superstructure's openings. For marine biologists, the World Discoverer represents a fascinating case study in how artificial structures can support natural ecosystems. The ship is essentially conducting an uncontrolled experiment in reef development, showing how quickly marine life can adapt to and colonize human-made environments. In some ways, the vessel is now more biologically productive than she ever was as a functional ship. This ecological transformation has also attracted a different kind of tourist, divers and snorkelers who come specifically to explore the underwater portions of the wreck. The clear waters of Roderick Bay offer excellent visibility, allowing underwater visitors to see how the ship's lower decks have been colonized by marine life. It's a unique diving experience that combines maritime history with natural reef exploration. The MS World Discoverer's status as a tourist attraction creates a complex ethical and practical situation that reflects broader questions about disaster tourism and cultural sensitivity. On one hand, the wreck draws visitors to the Solomon Islands who might never have considered the destination otherwise. These tourists spend money on flights, accommodations, guides, and local services, providing economic benefits to communities that have few other sources of international revenue. Local entrepreneurs have built small businesses around World Discoverer tours, offering everything from boat transportation to the wreck site to guided exploration of the ship's interior. Some guides are former maritime workers who can explain the technical aspects of the ship's construction and the circumstances of her grounding. Others focus on the natural history aspects, pointing out the marine life that has colonized the wreck and the way tropical vegetation is reclaiming the upper decks. But this tourism also raises uncomfortable questions about safety and responsibility. The MS World Discoverer was never designed to accommodate visitors after decades of abandonment and decay. The ship's structure has been compromised by rust, flooding, and the removal of structural materials by scavengers. Walking through the interior involves real risks: unstable flooring, sharp metal edges, potential exposure to hazardous materials, and the possibility of getting trapped in a partially collapsed section. Most of the tours offered are unauthorized, meaning they operate without government oversight or safety standards. Visitors sign no waivers, receive no safety briefings, and have no recourse if something goes wrong. The Solomon Islands government lacks the resources to properly regulate or monitor these activities, creating a situation where tourists assume all risks without fully understanding them. There's also the question of cultural sensitivity. The World Discoverer's grounding occurred during one of the most traumatic periods in Solomon Islands history, when civil war was tearing the country apart. For some locals, the wreck is a reminder of that difficult time and the international attention it brought to their nation's problems. Others see it as a symbol of opportunity and economic development. These different perspectives create complex social dynamics around the ship's current status. 23 years after running aground, the MS World Discoverer continues her slow transformation from human artifact to natural reef. Each year brings new damage from storms, tides, and tropical weather. Each year sees more material stripped away by scavengers and more structural deterioration from rust and corrosion. The ship that once carried passengers to observe the power of natural forces is now demonstrating that power herself. Maritime experts who have studied the wreck estimate that the World Discoverer has perhaps another decade or two before she becomes truly unsafe for interior exploration. The ship's superstructure is slowly weakening, and eventually sections will begin collapsing into the flooded lower decks. When that happens, the vessel will transition from being a walkable wreck to being purely an underwater diving site. But even as the ship decays, her story continues to resonate with people around the world. The World Discoverer represents something profound about human ambition and natural humility. Here was a vessel specifically designed to take people to the most remote and challenging environments on Earth, equipped with the best technology and operated by experienced professionals. Yet she was ultimately defeated by something as simple as an uncharted coral reef in tropical waters. The wreck also serves as a powerful reminder about the impermanence of human achievement. The MS World Discoverer once represented the cutting edge of expedition cruise technology, capable of safely transporting passengers to places most humans would never see. Today, she's slowly being reclaimed by the same natural forces she was built to navigate. Her former luxury accommodations now home to tropical fish and seabirds. The story of the MS World Discoverer offers several profound lessons that extend far beyond maritime history. The first is about the relationship between human technology and natural forces. No matter how sophisticated our engineering becomes, nature ultimately has the final say. The double hull construction that protected the ship through decades of Antarctic service couldn't save her from one moment of contact with a coral reef that didn't appear on any chart. The wreck also demonstrates the complex economics of maritime disasters. The decision to declare the World Discoverer a constructive total loss wasn't based solely on the physical damage to the ship. It reflected the political and logistical realities of conducting a salvage operation in a remote, unstable location. Sometimes the cost of rescue exceeds the value of what's being rescued, even when rescue is technically possible. Captain Cruce's decision to ground his ship in Roderick Bay illustrates the kind of split-second leadership that separates professional mariners from casual boat operators. He had seconds to evaluate multiple life-and-death scenarios and choose the option that prioritized human lives over material assets. His willingness to sacrifice his ship to save his passengers represents the highest traditions of seamanship. The wreck's transformation into an artificial reef shows how nature adapts to human intrusions in unexpected ways. The MS World Discoverer wasn't intentionally designed as habitat for marine life, but the tropical Pacific has claimed her anyway, creating new ecosystems where none existed before. In some ways, the ship is now more biologically productive than she ever was as a functional vessel. Finally, the complicated tourism economy that has developed around the wreck reflects broader questions about how societies should deal with disaster sites. The MS World Discoverer attracts visitors precisely because of her tragic history, raising ethical questions about profiting from maritime disasters while also providing economic opportunities for local communities with few other sources of international revenue. Today, if you charter a boat in the Solomon Islands and make the journey to Roderick Bay, you'll find the MS World Discoverer exactly where Captain Cruce left her on April 30th, 2000. She sits tilted but upright in the clear tropical water, her rust-stained superstructure rising above the surface like the skeleton of some prehistoric sea creature. The ship that once carried passengers to observe penguins in Antarctica now hosts a very different kind of wildlife. Tropical birds nest in her upper decks, fish school around her submerged hull, and vegetation grows through gaps in her steel plating. The observation lounge that once framed views of glaciers and icebergs now overlooks a peaceful bay surrounded by dense tropical forest. Visitors who make the journey to see the World Discoverer often report being struck by the contrast between the ship's former purpose and her current state. This vessel was specifically built to take humans to the most remote corners of the planet, yet she herself has become one of those remote destinations that appears on very few tourist itineraries. The wreck serves as a powerful meditation on time, ambition, and the relationship between human achievement and natural forces. In her working years, the MS World Discoverer helped passengers understand the awesome power of Antarctic ice and Pacific storms. Now, in her abandonment, she demonstrates those same forces in a more personal and immediate way. 23 years after running aground, the MS World Discoverer remains one of the most accessible shipwrecks in the world and one of the most haunting. She's a ghost ship in the truest sense, neither fully alive nor completely dead, slowly transitioning from human artifact to natural reef in the warm waters of the South Pacific. Her story reminds us that every voyage, no matter how carefully planned or expertly executed, carries the possibility of becoming something entirely unexpected. The passengers who boarded the World Discoverer for Antarctic expeditions never imagined their ship would end up as a tropical artificial reef. Captain Cruise never expected to sacrifice his vessel to save his passengers. The Solomon Islands residents never anticipated a cruise shipwreck would become part of their local economy. But that's exactly what makes the MS World Discoverer's story so compelling. In a world where most outcomes seem predictable and most risks seem manageable, her story reminds us that the ocean still has the power to humble human ambition and create its own unexpected narratives. The ship that was built to help people explore the unknown has herself become one of the most fascinating unknowns in maritime history.